Electric Cafe.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. Today's album review is on Polygon Windows, Surfing on Sine Waves, 1993. Of course, Polygon Window is Aphex Twin, otherwise known as Richard D. James, and this came out on Warp Records in 1993. So this album is actually getting reissued coming up. I think it should be out sometime this month, and so I wanted to take the time and reissue it just because it was on my mind. It was something I revisited. It was something that I reviewed for an online publication, and I thought I'd just review it. And while I was listening to it again, I decided to score it and wanted to do it here and for my channel and review it. So at the time, this particular album was, it was kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit. Like when you think of like 1992, like right before this came out, of course, his first album came out, the 89 or 86 to 92 compilation. And then, he was doing some stuff on RNS. Of course, the Didgeridoo and the Xylem EP, both those came out in 1993. Of course, On came out on Warp under Aphex Twin, and then Saw 2 came out the same year as Polygon Windows as well. And this was right after, all the Caustic Window stuff. Here's a vinyl copy as well. But so 1992 was a very busy year, very, very, very productive year for Aphex Twin. Polygon Window, the two Aphex Twin releases within a year or so, 2 EPs, and then also the Caustic Window stuff, all within about a year and a half. And sometimes the Polygon Window album gets overlooked when you think about how popular those other albums are. And so I wanted to take time to review it and see where it kind of places, comparatively to the other ones. So I need to review the other ones as well and compare them. I know these albums really well. Of course, I got these. I was a big Aphex Twin. I think I first heard him somewhere around 1992 was the first time I heard Aphex Twin, when I heard the track. I think it was the Caustic Window one. It's like the one with the number on it, like the Aphex 2165 or whatever it is. I always forget the name of that track. Aphex 114. That was the first track I ever heard by Aphex Twin, and then soon after, I picked up everything he could. It was so different, like what Aphex Twin was doing in 1992, 93 to pretty much everything that was out at the time. And so I think, like most people, he kind of became probably the biggest star in underground electronic music at that time, right away with quite a few releases, like I was talking about. And it seems like a lot of times people overlook the Polygon Window album, and it's probably just because it's not named Aphex Twin. Because when you think of a lot of people that somewhat like Aphex Twin don't even know maybe not even know about his Caustic Window stuff. But it seems like most people that get into Aphex Twin, they really get into him. There's probably one of the most hardcore fan bases of any electronic artist, and I kind of feel like I know his work pretty well, and I would probably be put to shame compared to a lot of people that really love his work. They probably would know a lot more about Richard James and the equipment he puts on, and the unreleased stuff he's done, and all the rumors and things that kind of make up his personality, and just kind of. But I'm kind of a superficial. I just kind of listen to his albums over the last 30 so years, and I don't buy everything that he's put out. Some of the stuff gets really expensive, and I sell it. Like I sold all my the 10 original Analords, which I bought when they came out in 2005 to 2006. So I've sold all those because they were all 120, 150 bucks a copy. So I sold all 10 of those that I had, and at one point I had probably like 3 copies of the original Saw, and I sold those. So a lot of the releases that get expensive when it comes to Aphex Twin, I generally sell. And I pretty much have all of his music on CDs. So when it comes to vinyl, it's not necessarily something I spin a lot when I DJ. So I don't mind having it on CD. It's not really a big deal if I if I don't have certain releases on vinyl, but I feel like I have most of them. But I do need to get Polygon Window on vinyl. It's one I just have on CD since it came out, and it's never been one that's been in big circulation in vinyl, and I've never really seen. Like a lot of the early albums, you don't generally find vinyl of Aphex Twin in the used bins through the 90s and 2000s. It wasn't until recently that you kind of, with the online and stuff like that, maybe the last 5-10 years, that you see a good amount of used Aphex Twin on vinyl. But as far as like being in a store, you would rarely come across it. So if you did, you picked it up. But Aphex Twin's always been one of those artists that I collect on vinyl and CDs. Like there's certain artists that kind of resonate with me or that I like at a certain level, and they have a lot of music, and I enjoy it on both formats. So I generally collected it on vinyl and CD. So if I didn't have it on vinyl, I had it on CD, and vice versa. And so he's always been an artist that I've collected until last couple of years when I started selling some of the Analord copies, and then over the years I've sold a few copies of Saw 2. And the Polygon Window's kind of been one of the last ones to get reissued. I know Xylon and Xylon Tube is getting reissued, I think, or Didgeridoo, one of the two. I think those are getting reissued, and of course Saw 2 got reissued last October. That's actually one of the reissued copies there, and of course, like back in like 2012. Saw 1 got reissued a lot, and still some of the singles need to get reissued again, probably like Come to Daddy and Rhubarb, Donkey Rhubarb, and Window Liquor and stuff like that. And I think probably even Drugs up here, Drugs needs to get probably reissued in the near future. So it's nice to see Aphex Twin kind of reissuing his stuff, because a lot of times on the second market, his records go for a lot of money, and it's kind of silly. So it's nice to see more copies get out, so so more people can have them. Actually, you know what? I sold my other copy of Caustic Window earlier this year as well. I had a sealed copy of Caustic Window, originally from 2002 when the vinyl came out. And we're gonna review Polygon Window here, Surfing on Sine Waves. I'll go track by track and listen to them, remind myself about them, and then I'll quickly talk about each. Actually, what I'll do is I'll probably play each song. You'll see my score on it, and then I'll come back with you at the end and just give my brief thoughts on Aphex Twin's Polygon Window, Surfing on Sine Waves from 1993 on Warp Records. So let's check out the first track.
It is
Oh, let's see if I can make it easier.
All right, so there we got a chance to hear each song on Surfing on Sine Waves by Polygon Window, aka Richard D. James, aka Aphex Twin, aka Tuss, and all the other names he records under. So the album starts off with the lead track from the album called Polygon Window, and if you know Caustic Window stuff, that's the reason why I put Caustic Window here with his releases, because this album seems like the closest extension of the Caustic Window stuff. Like Caustic Window stuff, I think resonates with the longtime Aphex Twin fans the most. You know, if you're into more of the IDM stuff, I can see what albums that you probably like. If you like the ambient albums, you know, I can probably tell which albums you like. But as far as like the early rave sound that he was doing, like it's really hard to beat the sounds and the aggressiveness on the early Caustic Window albums, and also the first two RNS singles. Most of the works collected for the Classics compilation in 1995 on RNS Records, and I'm actually wearing an Apollo Records t-shirt coincidentally today, which was the sub-label of RNS. That I think, Saw One came out on Apollo Records originally before. I don't know if it ever. I can't always forget if it got re-released on Warp, but I don't think it did. I think knowing RNS and Apollo Records, how serious they are about their catalog, I doubt they reissued it to anybody else. I kind of know that for first experience. Long story short, there. But you know, the first track, Polygon Window, is probably the most tied to what he was doing under the Caustic Window name. And for those that really like the early rave, like the hardcore fans of early Aphex Twin, like before Saw 1, really even before Saw 2 and before On came out, the single, and like this is his most raw stuff under the Caustic Window, and Polygon Window's music seems like it's done like right after that. Like when you hear the first track, Polygon Window, which is my favorite on the album. Starts off with my favorite song on the album. I give it an 8.25 stars. I think it's excellent. It's got the vintage kind of, to me, the vintage early Aphex rave sound. It's eerie. It's dark. The bass line has that kind of almost like wobbling kind of sound that's just really unique, and you don't know if it's like metallic or if it's like wooden, or it's just such a strange kind of like wobbling bass on that, and then of course the fast drum notes is vintage Aphex Twin, which he did a lot on his early rave stuff, just like that through it, and you know, it's probably, you know, it seems like it's done right after the Joyrec series of Caustic Window, and it's right, you know, my favorite track on this album, 8.25 stars. And then you have the second track called Audax Powder, and this one is very much like an extension of the first Saw album. When you think of like some of my most favorite tracks, like and Extol, and just kind of, and even On, like this is that vintage kind of first IDM sound that Aphex Twin really started with. Like as he kind of progressed to like the Window Licker and Come to Daddy and stuff like that, it's a lot more to the drill and bass side than this. The earlier stuff is a lot more tied towards the original IDM sound, and this is, you know, vintage Aphex Twin sound. It's got a really beautiful melody, but at the same time, it's kind of a little kind of I wouldn't even say whimsical, because it's kind of it's just eerie. But there's always like one thing that's great about Aphex Twin and his melodies. He always has kind of like a twisted sense of humor injected into his tracks, and that kind of course, permeates into his iconic look, and you know, like the faces and the acid faces and stuff like that. Like his personality really kind of gets into some of the melodies, and that's kind of where the kind of twisted, mad kind of genius is in Aphex Twin. Like even when you get a melody that's really beautiful, there's always like a weirdness in there where there's something behind that. There's something behind that that beautifulness, and it's something like twisted. And so it's almost like it's there's not too many artists that put their personality in their music like Aphex Twin did. He was probably one of the first to really do that with certainly rave music and certainly IDM, but his personality just comes across so well in this. And again, this has the kind of powerful early rave breakdowns and kind of segues into that, and then comes back to the melodies, and it's kind of like a second tier. I wouldn't say it's as good as like On, like from under his original name Aphex Twin, because obviously that's a single. But as far as like the second tier IDM sound, that are right there at like excellent, 7 to 8 stars. This is right there. In fact, this is tied for my third favorite track on the album, Audex Powder, and I give it 7 3/4 stars. So obviously right under excellent, but great track. It's just vintage Aphex Twin sound for sure. So the third track on Surfing on Sine Waves is Quoth. And Quoth was the only single from the album that has a separate release by itself. And Quoth, again, very much like the Caustic Window Joyrec series, just a devastating heavy beat and mechanical sounds and just relentless. Probably one of his most, I would say probably well-known of his more mechanical, more rave tracks. Because again, a lot of the Joyrecs is still a little bit underground, even to Aphex Twins that are somewhat fans. A lot of times they probably more like the IDM sound than the earlier rave stuff. But Quoth is probably, the perfect extension. And this is, in some ways, this is like his last, along with Didgeridoo and the Xylem Tube, this is kind of like the end of Aphex's kind of rave period. Like during this time in 91, 92, 93, he was touring a lot, like a lot of like underground raves. I've seen ones in videos of him in Australia and of course in UK, and then when 94, 95 came, he finally came to America, and he was on a big tour here in Aphex Twin, here on tour in America with like Moby, and I think it was Orbital and Drum Club and stuff like that. So it was one of the probably biggest rave associated tours at the time with a lot of international artists. I can't remember the name of it, but that was, Aphex Twin was on that, and that's kind of when he went to, that's right when he went to like superstardom and was, considered like one of the geniuses of electronic music, kind of that 94, 95 period. But this particular album, this is kind of the last of his kind of rave sound. Like 93 is kind of the end of that. A little bit squeaks into I Care Because You Do. A little bit squeaks into that, but that's a little bit more, that album's a little bit more polished. And Polygon Window, Quoth directly, still has that very, even though Quoth is still a little bit more polished than Caustic Window, it still has that kind of more tied to a warehouse rave sounds of that time. Just very, very aggressive, very heavy mechanical sound. Definitely has that kind of Belgian influence, that kind of doomy, big melody, and just attention getting rave music. Just techno jungle in there, and maybe even a hint of what's going to become drum and bass, and just a lot of hardcore and early IDM, and Aphex Twin threw the melody in there, and that sort of became the IDM sound for a little bit there. And Quoth is one of the strongest on this album for sure, and it's tied for my third favorite again, like with the second track, Audex Powder, comes in at a 7 3/4 stars, right under excellent. I think for people that love this album, I think they would probably rate Quoth a little higher than I do, at least in the 8s, and give it an excellent score. Mine's just right below that. It's not necessarily something I play. I do think it's one of the stronger songs of the album. But again, when I think of like my favorite, Aphex Twin songs from this period, I generally like the ones that are a little bit more IDM, like On, and Xtal, and but then also his early electro, stuff like Blue Cocks and Green Cocks and Pulse Width and Arpeggialis, the track from Saw 1, Apeigloes. I always forget how to pronounce that one. Agriapolis or something like that. But anyways, those are a little bit more of the raw early kind of electro tracks. So there's a lot of different styles that Aphex Twin's doing during this time, and this Quath is certainly one of his more ravey ones, but it's definitely fits in again with the Joyrec stuff, and it's on that level for me, but not quite to the level where I'm saying it's excellent and put it 8, but it's as close as you can get, 7.75. Again, tied for my third favorite track on this album. So then you have the track number 4 called "Is It Really Me?" This one's one of the longer tracks on the album, a little bit over 7 minutes. It is a little bit long, but it that kind of builds the tension and the ominous sound in it, and it's the creepy kind of melody that goes through it, and it's kind of like, I wouldn't say it's really like sci-fi, but it's more like detective and kind of mysterious and unique, and it's kind of interesting to hear this. This is the first time I've heard this track in a few years, and you don't often hear a consistent beat on a techno beat on Aphex Twin's songs anymore, and it's funny to hear that, and then this is back in the early days, like when he actually did consistent beats. Like everything's so aggressive, and even if it's acid house or drill and bass or IDM or ambient, whatever it is, like it's rare that you hear like an Aphex Twin with this consistent kind of beat like that. But that's kind of the time. It's very like X-Tall and this track, and I think this is a good track. It's I give it 7 stars. I think it's very good actually. But I wouldn't say it's one of the best on the album, but it's consistent. It's right in line with the rest of the album. I feel like it has its place. Again, it might be a little bit too long, but not too much else to say about it. Just it's a pretty strong track. Then you have track number 5 called "Supremacy 2." Again, probably his most ravey song on this album. Again, very much like Caustic Window stuff. This is again kind of the end of the rave days right here, '93. So, you get the aggressive drums, you get the big kind of doomy melody again, and I give this one 7 stars as well. It's just, it's vintage kind of ravey Aphex Twin. I think if you grew up through this time and that's what you first heard, then I think it's a little bit easier to probably put it in perspective of growing up through the rave years. If you did grow up through the rave years, I would think if you're kind of a newer fan of Aphex Twin or maybe a casual fan, this may sound a little dated in some ways, but if you went to raves in the 90s, this kind of gives you flashbacks of those really kind of warehouse rave days, and it's kind of exciting and it's dangerous. That's the thing about rave music that's often missed when it comes to clubbing these days and stuff like that. Like, raves were really dangerous back then. Everything was dangerous about raves in the early 90s. Like, the drugs were scary, who you were going to party with, and was the rave going to get broken up, and who were the owners, and was there gang members outside that were trying to stop the rave, and the music, kind of was very aggressive too and very dangerous in its own way. And that's why it's kind of, I feel like a lot of ways, like the early DIY producers and that really kind of sweaty early rave surroundings, just kind of lended itself to the powerful music that was being made during that time. Just a very special time for those kind of grew up through it. And when you hear a track like "Supremacy 2," it just kind of, those memories kind of flood back of how crazy those times were. Then it comes to track number 6 called "UT1 Dot." It's one of my favorite tracks on the album. This is so vintage Aphex Twin. This is the kind of Aphex Twin I like when it comes to like the darker stuff. The melody is so eerie and so dark, and the acid kind of rave sound in there, and the heavy beat, and just such a dark track and menacing. And it's great that a track that it's as menacing and as dark as this is still kind of on the slower BPM. It's not heavy, hardcore, in your face, dark like some of the hardcore rave can be. This is like very eerie and dark. The vintage Aphex Twin in this. I give it 8.25 stars. Tied for my favorite track on the album, along with the opener, Polygon Window. Just love this track, and it's so it's in a different way than the kind of rave memories. Like, this is kind of like the Aphex Twin that I one of his styles that I really love, when he kind of nails this kind of like darker edge. This is almost kind of like songs in Saw 2, but put to a beat. Like that's kind of like the crossover for a lot of Saw 2 is it feels like some of the later tracks on here in the Polygon Window album, Surfing on Sine Waves. Like some of these tracks definitely could fit on Saw 2, and this, especially this one, such a killer track. 8.25 stars. And then you come to track number 7 called Entitled, and this is a perfect type of track after UT1 Bot. This is the kind of track that it doesn't quite do it justice, kind of sitting in a couch here and playing, on some home speakers. Like, but if you heard this track at like a rave or something like that, or it was super dark with all the lights off, this track would take on a whole nother life. It's kind of almost disrespectful for me to try to rate and rank some of these older rave tracks that are designed for a dark, sweaty warehouse club. Like, it's almost disrespectful for me to just say, hey, I think I give it a 7. I think it's very good. But I'm sure if I heard it like in a rave or something like that, which I never got a chance to hear this particular track in a rave, but if I did, and it was in that type of atmosphere and the speakers were pumping, like this track would certainly make people's heads like, what the hell is this? And I like that kind of dangerous extension of Aphex Twin and him kind of taking things to the extreme, like he's so strong at doing. Whatever style he does, he takes it to the extreme. And this track, he takes it to the rave extreme. And it's interesting because rating it, I give it a 7. But man, if I heard this at a rave, I'd probably say it was like a 9 or a 10, because it's just one of those tracks that just it needs to be in that environment to really understand it, and I can put myself in it because I've been to early '90s raves, and it's hard to do that if you never gone to an illegal warehouse rave back in the '90s. It was obviously, again, it was something very special, but if you heard something like this in there, it'd be mind blowing. And then you come to the last 2 tracks on the album, Coyote and Kino Fek, I believe that is. So track number 8, Coyote, I give it a 6.75 stars. This album kind of ends on a little bit of a shallow note. My 2 least favorite tracks end it. I still think Coyote is a strong song. I give it a 6.75 stars again, so it's right under very good, but it's the only 2 tracks, these last 2 of the 9, that are below a 7. And I still think Coyote's a strong rave kind of track. It's very in line with the previous tracks, but not quite to the level of those of the 3 before, Supremacy, UT1 Dot, and the Untitled. Not quite to that level, but it's really close. And then the last track, kind of an ambient track, very much in ties with Saw 2. Definitely has that kind of eerie sound. And sometimes I think of like some of the music in Saw 2, like it's like the perfect stalker music. And probably the reason why that is and maybe one of these days I'll get a copy of it. But back in like 1998, I helped a gentleman that I was working with. He was going to he was either Montana State or Montana, but he had filmed a short movie. It was like 15 or 20, maybe 30 minutes long, and it was called .com, and it was actually kind of a clever movie. And it was basically about a guy who was online, and like some guy was sort of emailing him and stalking him at the same time, and he wasn't sure if a killer was there. So he was walking around his house, and then it turned out they were actually sending him messages, that he was going to get killed or something like that. And sure enough, there was somebody outside, and it kind of killed him. So it was kind of like a Twilight Zone kind of movie, but it was back in the early days of like the internet and stuff like that. So it was kind of had a cool kind of Twilight Zone internet twist to it. But it was a gentleman I worked at the studio with, and he asked me, because he knew I was into electronic, he asked me if I could bring him some music, because he had some Muzak in there as well, but he needed some kind of key tracks to fit into the mold. And sure enough, when I got home, I brought in the next day, I brought in Saw 2, and we put about 3 or 4 different tracks into that movie. and it fit like a glove, like into the movie. It's very creepy sounding. So I always think of like Saw 2 and this particular track on the end here, a Polygon Window, Kino Effect. I always think of like there's always like sort of like a stalker element sound into very eerie and almost like a Halloween type music, but just very haunting music and very it's Saw 2 is a very special album in a lot of ways, and a lot of people kind of laud it as the best thing ever, and some people kind of give it a little bit of grief because it's so long, and there's some tracks on there that don't really do too much, and might give it some slack for what it is. But as far as like capturing a certain or being sort of like a soundtrack album to some kind of like sci-fi movie, some kind of like tribal sci-fi stalker movie, that there are some really eerie tracks on there, on Saw 2, and this is right there. So anytime I hear a track like this or Saw 2, I always kind of remember that we did that movie. And one of these days I'll have to contact my friend and see if he can send me over a copy, and I'll put the movie on my channel here, and you'll see what we did with the tracks. I think it went so well with the video. It was great. I think he ended up getting like second or third place at the university for best movie. It was kind of like they did like a film festival, and I think it won second or third place in the all the people that made the movies at that university for that specific whatever you call it. Movie showing. What do they call those things overseas? Like the film festival. Yeah, it was like a film festival. So I guess it won like second or third at that. But I'll get that. It was called .com, and I'll get that sometime and bring it on because it's cool because you can hear the Aphex Twin songs on it. It's really really cool. But yeah, that's my overall thoughts on each track. And when I add the stars up to the album and rate it comes up to a 73. So right into a very good album, and I give it a couple extra points just for the timeless sound of the album. Still sounds good today in kind of a vintage way. I wouldn't give it like a lot of extra points, but I wanted to give it an extra 2 points. I think it's right in the middle of very good and excellent, and so yeah, I give it a 75 out of 100. Very good album. Still, when you compare it to like Saw 1 or Saw 2 or I Care Because You Do, or maybe if there was a Caustic album, if I rated that album, this would probably be the Polygon one would probably be my least favorite of all of the early 90s when it comes to like maybe 1991 to like 1995 period, just before you really got into the drill and bass stuff with the Come to Daddy and stuff like that. Like this would probably be my least favorite of that period, but still, when you think about it, a 75 out of 100, and it's my least favorite of that period. Just shows how strong Aphex Twin's music was. But still, I think even if I was to compare this to like an EP, and there was only 4 tracks, like the Didgeridoo or Xylem Tube or On, like those are so iconic, compared to Polygon Window. I think Polygon Window is an album that has its place, but it doesn't really. I don't think it really sets itself, or it doesn't really set itself apart from the rest. There's nothing that really like that is that kind of upper echelon of Aphex Twin. Even a song or two on an album. When I think of all of his other albums, that kind of is like head and shoulders like. Oh, that's the reason why I go to Polygon Window. Besides Quoth, there's a couple songs in there certainly that I like, but I always kind of forget about. Like I online a couple years ago, I did my top 50 Aphex Twin songs, and I think a couple of tracks in here were kind of in the 20s or 30s, but that just shows you, even at like an 8 1/4, 2 tracks on here, and they're down in the 20s or even in the 30s. You can see how much I love Aphex Twin stuff, and how I consider a lot of his stuff in the high 8s and 9s, and probably a couple that are near perfect IDM tracks, especially when I think of like one of the Joy Rex tracks or On or Xtol. You know, if you want, I'll put a link here. See, I did review Saw 1 so far. This is my second Aphex Twin album I'm doing, reviewing for my album. I think I gave Saw 1 like an 88 or an 86, somewhere around there in the high 80s. Obviously, that's a classic album. It's right on the cusp of... it is an all-time classic for me in the genre, but again, when it gets in that 90s, it's like a universal classic for any kind of music, and it's right there for me. And the reasons, and you got to watch the video if you want my full critique on Saw 1, because there are a few tracks there at the end of Saw 1 that kind of bring the album down a little bit, although I think it's a groundbreaking album, and there's a lot of iconic songs on there, and a lot of songs I love. There's a few at the end of Saw 1 that you know, that maybe are pretty good or very good, but just not quite to the level of a lot of the earlier tracks on the album. And then also, you know, there's some rumors out there that some of the songs weren't done in like 85 to 92. So I kind of take out, I don't deduct any points for that, but it does kind of lose a little bit of the steam as far as like, I don't think a lot of those tracks were made in 85. There might be an idea of one in 85 and maybe 86, 87, but I can't think of any of those songs were made before like 88. Like, I think the 85, 86, 87 is pushing it. You know, maybe some of the sounds were made during that time when he was, but, you know, that's another story. But just as far as like the music itself, there's a few on the album that are kind of pretty good to very good, but not necessarily on the par to kind of keep the album in the 90s. You know, it's hard for an album to be consistent and average out to be in the 90s. It's just really hard to do when you actually sit down and critique something. And that album gets about as close as one could without being excellent. I think I gave it, again, an 88. But here, Surfing on Sine Waves is 75. Very strong album, but, you know, again, one of Aphex Twin's lesser known ones because it's not on their name, but in some ways it's important to know it. But you know, it's still, I think for the most part with most people, it kind of falls under the caustic window stuff for me, and definitely falls under the Aphex Twin stuff. It's probably my least favorite Aphex Twin album from his prime years of 91 to like 95, 96. Yeah, that's my thoughts on Surfing on Sine Waves, 75 on 100. Curious to know your thoughts and what your scores would be on some of the tracks. Put those down below if you'd like, and your overall score of the album. And thanks for watching and your time, and I appreciate that as always, and we'll see you on the next video.
Electric Cafe.